House Republicans have released 2 articles of impeachment, not against Joe Biden. They'll get to that soon, don't worry, but against the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. This is someone that they've been talking a lot about, both because they want to focus on the border. They want that to be the big policy that's driving conversation about politics during this election, but also because I think they think that impeaching him is a way to sort of proxy impeach Joe Biden that might be a little bit easier to sell to the American people. So with that said, here's how they're gonna try to sell it. They say that Mayorkas willfully and systemically refused to comply with the immigration laws, failed to control the border to the detriment of national security, compromised public safety, and violated the rule of law and separation of powers in the Constitution to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. So what they mean there is some migrants cross the border and we don't like that. Now, when they cross the border when Trump is in charge, that's okay. That's just more reason to build wall. But when it happens under Biden, then clearly people need to be impeached. They say that he deliberately violated immigration law passed by Congress, which that's a point that we're gonna return to, so keep that in mind. Such as those requiring detention of migrants, and that through these policies, a crisis has arisen at the border. They accuse him of releasing migrants without effective ways to make sure they show up for court or removed from the country. We're not going to go through all of how utterly dishonest that is. We've already talked in many cases back when Trump was in office about how there is a shocking level of compliance with that. When people are released and told that they have to return, it's in the high 90s. They don't care. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in a solution to the problem. They're interested in pitching it as a crisis. They need it for Donald Trump to distract from all of his legal troubles. They need it to try to beat Joe Biden in 2024. And by the way, this isn't even new. Every election, there's a crisis at the border. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed how caravans manifest out of the air like mist whenever an election is drawing near? So, what do you know? There's another crisis in this area. In any event, as of right now, the articles of impeachment have just been released, but the vote is expected to come soon. The House Homeland Security Committee might be voting as soon as tomorrow on this. That would send it to the full House for consideration. And Speaker Mike Johnson is saying that he's going to expedite this. He really wants to score some points amongst the anti-immigration loonies in his party. This is an easy, basically free way for him to do that. So I expect that they probably will be voting on it this week. That said, if he is impeached by the House, that does not mean that he's immediately removed from his position. As with attempts to impeach Joe Biden, it would have to go to the Senate. You would need a 2/3 majority to convict him, which has absolutely no chance whatsoever of happening. So all of this is on one level or another political theater, but it's the theater that's going to happen. So I guess get a ticket and sit down. This is a show that we're not gonna be able to stop anytime soon. Adrienne, what do you make of this?
I think it's a great observation that you make, because it's something that always baffles me in terms of there's always an issue at the border. The us them narrative is always triggered in some way, especially around an election time. And people don't care that a lot of it is a farce, that it's just a way to conjure the fear that someone's going to take what, as far as I'm concerned, the US has already taken from others. But basically someone's gonna do to the US what it's done to others. And it's not even legit, yet so many people in the US are still fearful of that. And they're in states that don't even have a border itself. Yet it's a way to get votes, to corrupt people's minds. And you just really wish that even some of these very educated, knowledgeable people would let go of that narrative and start focusing on the things that are actually important.
Yeah, and by the way, so you point out that hypocrisy. And the thing is, the hypocrisy is being played out on a daily basis in multiple ways, in topics that we have discussed on the show. And so we're gonna remind you of something. So the idea is Mayorkas isn't following the law, ergo he can't maintain his position. And specifically, he's not following the law on immigration, so he's gotta go. What else is going on nationally in the topic of immigration right now? Well, the Supreme Court said the Biden administration can remove the concertina wire at the barrier. Basically, sort of a proxy ruling designed to reinforce the now centuries old, established fact that when it comes to a disagreement between the states and the federal government on immigration, the federal government is supreme. Supreme Court said that. That was already the law. That's already what the Constitution said. The Supreme Court is just reminding us of that. They're willing to start a civil war over that. They've got a trucker convoy at the southern border. 25 Republican governors have agreed with Greg Abbott that they are willing to potentially take this thing to shots being fired. So they're not following the law. They're explicitly saying we don't have to follow what the Supreme Court says on here. They're very clear about that. The Oklahoma governor said that states can just ignore the Supreme Court if it, quote, gets something wrong. But by definition, according to our Supreme, look, I think they can get things wrong, but according to our Constitution, it is still the law. You can't just ignore it. That's not how any of this is supposed to work if we're gonna have our government. And so they've got a sort of tenuous grasp on how you need to comply with the law. And at the same time, by the way, the idea here is that it's so bad that he's not abiding by the law because we have a crisis. We have a situation that needs to be fixed. He's not fixing it, ergo he must lose his position. But you might recall that the bipartisan Senate border deal that's been being worked on for months now, they're now saying we're not gonna pass that because that would give Biden a win. So they're saying on the one hand, you have a crisis that needs to be fixed, but to fix it, that would help Biden. So we're gonna tank the whole thing. So what is it? Is it a border crisis that is so serious that people should lose their positions over it? Or is it something that I could wait until after the election? We don't need to worry about it. Like as we are doing this show right now, Trump is continuing to bleat about how they should not pass the border bill, saying it's not necessary, okay? Well, if it's not necessary, then clearly we don't have that big of a crisis that necessitates impeachment. So the hypocrisy just plays out in so many different levels, and they're not even trying to hide it. They're campaigning on this right now, Adrienne. And unfortunately, the issue is that so many of the people in their base, they're not thinking this through. They've been taught to despise migrants. They've been taught that their job could be taken, they could be killed, they could be raped. That's the stakes in this. So they're not thinking logically about this. They're not thinking rationally about the obvious hypocrisy that the right wing is playing out on a daily basis.
No, and I think this plays in part into why Trump said if he were going to run for office, he would do it on the Republican ticket because, I think he said Republicans are stupid. It's the thought that these individuals, unfortunately, they've been fear-mongered to think that what their people generally have done to a number of indigenous people or to other groups will be done to them. And so to have this us-them narrative, that is something that they love to push because it works so damn well, especially since we have so many underlying forms of just kind of hate and shade for other groups and people who do not look standard white and whatnot, that's what they're able to leverage. And so we see it every time where it's like almost like holding up some keys in front of a cat and dangling them and saying, border crisis, other people are coming. It just makes people completely and totally lose all sense of reason.
Yeah, it should be more complex to distract tens of millions of people, but it isn't really that bad. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.